All right, you guys, welcome to Boss Bitch Radio. If you are new here, welcome. We talk about a variety of fitness, health, diet, mindset, and overall health and relationship stuff here. And today I have a question for you. Do you struggle with emotional eating, maybe binging, or feeling controlled by food? If the answer is yes, kinda, maybe, then you will be excited for our guest today, Meredith Ries. Her work is so widely needed in the space of health and fitness. So I urge you to listen and see if anything about what we're talking today resonates with you. So, welcome, Meredith. I'd like to start with you sharing with our audience your background as to how it brought you to this work.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So excited to be here. Yeah, I mean, I have just so much to share, but I'll try to keep it kind of minimal so everyone can follow, don't get too boring. But yeah, I started out diets at 11 and really conscious about my weight then. It was the fat-free era, so I was very scared of fat. I didn't want to eat it, but I ate a ton of fat-free things, thinking that was going to make me thin, which was actually full of sugar and additives and all those things.
Mm.
Struggled with my weight for years, struggled with anxiety for years. And the two, I think one drove the other. The anxiety drove the eating, and then the eating drove the anxiety. So it was in graduate school where I really struggled. And I was, just really overly anxious all the time. I was constantly using food as a crutch, but then I would start over on Monday. I would start a new diet. I would, not eat. I would drink, special liquids and things to try to get skinny. And then I would binge eat and I would, do all the things. And I just kept going around in cycles over and over again. And still struggling with my anxiety, still my heaviest self in graduate school, and really struggling with anxiety and depression. I was going to graduate school to become a licensed therapist. So the whole time I'm thinking, well, I should have control over my own emotions if I'm going to be helping other people with their emotions. And I started to kind of take weight loss and those things. I was so discouraged and felt like I was such in a rut with that I kind of just pushed it away and didn't care anymore. But at the same time, I was going to my own therapist and I was working on my anxiety and my depression specifically. And I actually started to lose some weight, but I wasn't actually dieting. So that was where I started to notice that there was a link between emotions and, our food choices and our physical self. And then I got into private practice because I have a brick and mortar private practice, and then I'm on the in the online space as an emotional eating coach also. And I actually, my clients taught me, which I'm so thankful for because they were coming in with the same types of struggle, anxiety, depression. They were there specifically for those things, but they would also report, like, I just ate so much. I can't stop eating. Like, I'm just over the top with cookies because I was so depressed. And I wasn't trained as an emotional eating coach. I wasn't trained as a health coach, which I am now. But I started to notice a big link again where emotions were driving those soothing, wanting comfort behaviors. And we were seeking things in the cupboard to try to soothe those things. And when they came in for therapy and we were dealing with the emotions on a deeper level, they were coming back, weeks, months later saying, like, well, I lost 10 pounds, I lost 5 pounds, I feel like I have control here. And we weren't even specifically looking at diet or exercise. It was only emotions. And that's where I really started to latch on to the emotional eating piece and realize that, hey, I have the emotional background and the emotional knowledge because I'm a therapist. But now I really want to work with women specifically so they can stop dieting because I know what it's like to be in the diet cycle. It's the worst feeling. It takes up so much of our mental space and it actually drives our anxiety because then we feel like a failure. We feel like we can't meet certain expectations. We hate, there's all these rules that aren't even ours that we have to meet every day. And it's just one more thing. So, my goal is to help as many women as possible break free from that stinking diet culture and just be really free and in tune with themselves because really they have the power inside them. We all do to not have to diet and to feel confident and be really in control of their food.
I love that. I got the chills from that. That's so great. I think one thing that I have been thinking about a lot lately as we're sort of moving towards the new year and people getting ready to make New Year's resolutions, my awareness around the issues that people have heightens and how I can help serve and how can I adapt my programs and change things because I know that this is an issue and I am a victim of diet culture. And I have been guilty as a coach early on in early age stages of my career with I think essentially contributing to part of the problem, right? You don't know what you don't know. And as I've been working with women for almost 20 years now, which is crazy to say out loud, I'm realizing more and more in my experience that their unhappiness, their emotional eating, their binging, um, they present with what they think is the problem. I'm overweight. I can't lose weight. The words they use, I'm fat, I'm this, I'm that. And I'm thinking, at least from what I'm hearing you say, it is more a symptom of a different problem. Like there's a deeper rooted problem, and it's manifesting as a symptom of binging, emotional eating, unhappiness with their body. But that's not the real problem. And so, what I'm trying to get the message across through this platform and my coaching programs is you could have the best macros, the best meal plan, the best training program, everything designed by a coach, by me. I've seen it time and time again, and still not be successful because we're not going in removing some of the layers of what is causing that as a symptom.
Absolutely. And, I'm just a firm believer, right, that emotion drives behavior. And so many of us, myself included, we weren't taught what to do with our emotions. I mean, there aren't really classes on this. When we're little kids, we often feel an emotion and we look to the people around us, teachers, our parents, our neighbors, our friends, like, what are they doing with their emotions? Like, what are they telling me to do with this big feeling I'm having?
Mhm.
And most of the time, they haven't been taught either. So it's like, oh, well, here's an ice cream, or yeah, I'll just, if you eat this cookie, you're going to feel so much better because you fell off your bike, right? And it's like, well, okay, the cookie gets my mind off it for us, maybe a split second, the dopamine rush, those things. I feel better, but it doesn't actually take away the trauma and the pain of like crashing my bike, right? You're still left with that. And what we learn to do is like, okay, so the cookie was supposed to solve it, it didn't. I still feel it. I probably shouldn't. Something's wrong with me, and I'm going to pack it away. And that's oftentimes what we do, moving through childhood. And then when we get into our adult world, we're using the same skills that we
Mhm.
learned through our childhood. It just looks a little different. And instead of the cookie, we can go to the store because we're grown-ups and we can buy the chips, the cookies, and things for ourselves, and we can eat them in our car. So it looks a little different. We're not asking our mom for the cookie or she's not giving it to us, but we've learned the skills. And it's really hard to break that. And like you're saying, you can have the best plan in the world and you can say like, okay, this time I'm going to do it, and it can feel really good, and you have all your cheer team on board, right? Coaches, doctors, whoever, and you can still fail because at the root of the issue is what you have learned to do with the emotions that actually drive your choices and behavior.
Yes. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like this is your current struggles with food, whether that's emotional eating, binging, and things of that sort, stem from the behavior, well, the lessons that you learned around food as a child and how food played a role in your emotions and maybe even disciplinary and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And I put stuff out on Instagram and things, and it's so funny because those are the things that people connect with the most is when I talk about childhood and the rewards we received as kids. people just really seem to connect with that because I think we can maybe relate, or we're from the same generation where it's like, oh, yeah, I was handed, an ice cream too. Like, I think it's just really relatable. And yeah, I mean, through as a therapist, I do a lot with attachment theory and things where we look
Mhm.
at, what we learned from our attachment figures, usually our guardians, our parents, our the older people in our life, and we're scanning them and we look to see what they approve of, don't approve of, right? And we modify our behavior from those feelings of approval and not. And if we were taught those things, what happens is we just practice it over and over and over. But so do they, because every time you fall off the bike, it's like, where's the cookie,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and we're doing the same thing as an adult.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, when you work with clients in your experience with working with clients in different disordered eating patterns, I suppose, are you finding any kind of correlation? So when you are seeing people who are bingers, are you seeing a correlation with something in childhood that maybe makes sense as to why they are exhibiting these behaviors? Like, were they deprived
Yeah.
food or, told you shouldn't eat that, those kinds of things? That's where my head goes. But again, you're the expert
Yeah,
here.
totally. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I think, yes, the rebel mindset, right?
Mhm.
Like I've been told not to. I was told not to as a kid. I can do anything I want now because I'm an adult. No one's in charge of me, right? So that's why we rebel against diets. We rebel against rules. We don't want those rules. We've dealt with them all our life. So it can feel really freeing. Also, again, emotions, trauma is a big one. Like, what do I do with all this load that I carry? And again, food is a release. Food is relief. It's not long term, it's split second. I think it lasts 20 seconds. Like it's not long. But when you're in an emotional place where it's painful and it's uncomfortable, we'll take the 20 seconds. Like if
Mhm.
that cookie's going to make me escape this for 20 seconds, I'm going to eat that cookie. Right? So the emotions, the rebel mindset, I think that has a lot to do with it, what we were taught as kids, how what we heard as kids, right? Like, I mean, I remember, I was born in the 80s, so I just remember, that time where everyone was talking about diets and
Mhm.
like, oh gosh, don't eat that. If I eat that, I'm going to be fat. Like, and
I
food
still hear
became,
that.
yeah, you
Yeah.
still hear it. And now I think, there's tools and we all know like, okay, well, that's your issue, not my issue. But as a kid, you're like absorbing that and you're like, ooh, food makes me fat. So food's the enemy. Right. And we just create all these different stories in
Mm.
our head and then we kind of take those and run with it. So
Yeah. Sounds
yeah.
super familiar. I've heard it all. Definitely. It's funny
Mm,
because I was telling my partner, I said, I know it sounds simplistic in terms of what I do or what my business does, right? We help women lose weight. We help them get in the best shape of their life. That is not what we do. Yes, that is an outcome for some people, but there is a lot of back end work that comes with our coaching. And I always preface it with this is out of our scope of practice, but we get very curious and we ask lots of questions and we send them to resources such as yourself. And I have a plethora of resources in which when we see, I was going to say patients, but clients exhibiting certain behaviors or continual struggles with something around food, we outsource that to people who have the tools for them. So it's really a lifestyle change in that they really start to make new habits based off of breaking old patterns and behaviors that didn't serve them any longer from traumas and childhood things like that, which is so deep and crazy to even think. I would have never thought so many years ago that I was like, oh, I'm just giving people meal plans and, teaching them like just eat more vegetables. No, it's a lot deeper than that for some people.
Yeah.
So moving on to a couple things. So first thing is understanding triggers for people. So how do you help people identify what their emotional triggers are for either overeating or binging?
Yeah. Well, I do an assessment oftentimes. When a client comes to me, I kind of assess, and this is for one-on-one. I do group too, but we can't get into the emotions as much with the group stuff. But with the one-on-one, I am thankful because I can get right into it. And we do kind of an assessment. They give me some background and we start to understand. But what I really like my clients to do is, instead of food tracking, I want you to track your emotions, right?
Mm,
Because your emotions drive the food choice. And so I don't at it, at the moment, like if you want to go count your macros and do that stuff, I'm like you. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to send you somewhere to do that because that's not me. I want to know the why, not the what. So, why are you choosing this food? And, why do you feel like you need that food? What are you feeling? Versus like, what are you eating? How many calories, right? Because we've all done that with the diet stuff we've probably all dabbled with or
mhm.
committed to throughout years and years. And this is a little different because my job is to help clients understand the link between what you feel and what you're eating. And of course, you need to just eat your normal foods. But oftentimes, what my clients are doing is they're like, oh, I was in the kitchen and I was mindlessly snacking and I was doing, these kind of behaviors that I didn't even notice. So I think number one is like you have to increase your awareness. You have to be aware and you have to be ready to take responsibility. And that's the hardest part. We feel resistance to take responsibility for the actions that we've chose, right? Because it brings up shame, which is awful to feel, and it brings up guilt, which is another awful feeling. And that those are the feelings that drive us to go to the cupboard in the first place. So, we have to be careful because when we increase our awareness, we also have to realize that we're going to feel resistance because we're trying to protect ourselves from the shame and guilt that drive us to the cupboard in the first place. And that's why I think you need support.
Definitely need support to work through that,
Yeah.
especially if you've never, I don't want to say comprehended but at least practiced some kind of awareness that can, I feel like can also be used in like my space as like the space that I work in as like mindfulness, right? Like be mindful and be aware. And I mean, very closely linked, but I think an awareness really shines a light at the moment as to like, why am I doing this? And we've been talking about this a lot on the podcast as of late because I'm reading a lot more about this and I want to really dive into it and learn so I can better serve the audience here on the podcast and obviously clients that work with us. But a lot of it comes down to, again, what you were saying is having that awareness and being able to stop in that moment and get real with yourself. But it is a challenge. You are faced with the shame and the guilt. And I'm wondering if that also triggers the cycle to get worse. Do you ever see that? Like it kind of gets worse before it gets better?
Yeah, and I think it does get worse because for some people, I think some people are like relieved because they're like, oh, wow, this is power and this is knowledge. And then I think some people, it does get worse because they start to see, they can recall, what they did like yesterday. But when they really start to look at what they're doing, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. Like, I can't
Mm,
believe I'm doing this every day.
hmm.
And so when we increase awareness, yes, there is the risk that you are going to feel worse before you get better. But again, I think like you're saying, like that's why it's really important to have somebody because when you feel that, that's when you need the coach, the trainer, like whatever, saying, hey, no, it's fine. You got this. Because if we didn't know this, then we can't change it. We know this now. So
Yeah.
we can totally challenge this and change it. And I'm going to be available for you even more during these days or this time or, during the coaching call to really unravel this. And you don't have to feel guilt about it because this
Hmm.
is awesome power that you now have.
Yeah. And such a great resource and tool to have that at your fingertips, especially
Yeah.
if this is something that's plaguing you daily, which is tends to be the case, right? Just it's this repetitive loop in your brain of shame and guilt and knowing you're doing the thing and you don't know how to stop to do, stop doing the thing. So, yeah, really great work. Now, when it comes to behavior patterns, could you share some typical patterns you observe in individuals that struggle with emotional eating?
Yeah. I think, the biggest thing is I think they've been taught to people please. I think they've been taught to put other people first. So I think one of the things I see a lot of is like there's no boundaries, right? You don't have any boundaries, or you've tried and they got kind of trampled, and you're like, oh, well, just, do this thing. And one of the other things to kind of that I was talking about with a client this week with the holidays is food pushers. And so when
Mm,
you look at the behaviors of emotional eaters with food pushers, oftentimes the emotions that you feel when somebody's pushing food on you are so big, you don't know what to deal with it. So you're the one eating the cake. And you eat the cake because they want you to, not because you want to. And then you're left with helping them with their emotion, but that did nothing for your emotion. And now you feel even worse. You're in more guilt and shame, and you're going to probably binge eat later on because you're piling emotions on top of you. So I think people pleaser, I think lack of boundaries, those types of things I see a lot of. And self-care, not putting yourself first, those kinds of things. And I see this because I'll ask people, okay, so what do you do for these things? And they'll look at me and they'll be like, I don't have time. Like, I don't know
mm,
what that is. Right. And that's when I think, okay, well, then there's a lot we can do here. Because
mhm.
if we can change those things, then we're going to get you more in control.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned I've talked about that years ago and you said food pushers and it just brought up memories of me in a phase throughout my coaching where I really got on my soapbox about quit falling prey to food pushers, right? Like it's okay to say no thank you or I don't want to and I'm always trying to give women strategies and tactics when they are faced with food pushers because I still exhibit that. And I think a lot of my demographic, which happens to be sometimes in the bodybuilding, well, most of the time in the bodybuilding community, when they're having to adhere to very strict regimented diet protocols and they have to go to a family function or a baby shower or something, and people are just coming at them like, just have a cupcake. Come on, one bite won't hurt. You can't have one drink. Like I've heard them all. And a lot of women are not comfortable with saying no. No, thank you. I have goals, or I'm working on this thing, or that makes my stomach hurt and I don't want to partake. And they just people please. So are there, I mean, mine are pretty straightforward and direct where I'm like, just tell them no, you don't want you don't have to do what you don't want to do. But are there some strategies that you give to clients that are like maybe recovering people pleasers that they can use in situations like that?
Yeah, I think we can do those things, right? We can say no, we can set the boundary. And what I try to explain is it's kind of underneath that. Um, like if you learn deeper why this is happening, then you're going to be able to say no easier. So
Mm,
they're pushing food on you because when you eat that cupcake, it takes away their guilt and shame for eating the cupcake. So they need you to eat the cupcake.
hmm
And so if we can remember that, then saying no is easier
hmm
because it's not they feel bad and they feel uncomfortable if you don't eat it, but it's not your uncomfortable to fix. That's theirs.
hmm
It's not your job to fix it. Right. And so every time you eat that cupcake because somebody else wanted you to eat it, you're helping them with their emotions and you're
mm,
doing nothing for your own. So we have to really separate that out and remember, the kind of the why again, like why is this happening? Why are we feeling this way? What is going on? Because that can empower you to then set the boundary, like you're saying, is like say no. Like
yeah.
say no, thank you. Hey, I'll bring it home. I'll bring it home. That'll make them feel better, right? And whatever you do with it at home is like just whatever. But you could say things like that, but yeah, don't sit there and eat it if you don't actually want it or if it doesn't actually align with where you're going with your health goals.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I've gone as far as having to give clients excuses they could use. Like, I'm allergic to that, or I
Yeah.
already ate, or something, because it's just so hard for them to just stand up and set boundaries. Yeah, it's a
Yeah, and
challenge.
family's the worst, right? Like we can do it to maybe the friends a little easier or the neighbor, but with our family, there's more emotion with that, and it can be harder. We feel more shame or we feel more guilt or we feel badly. So yeah,
Hmm.
something to just kind of be aware of.
Definitely. Now, kind of circling back to the mindfulness awareness piece of things, how is it that you, like, in terms of tools, give clients to encourage them to be mindful, like around their food choices, around their eating habits? Are there specific tools that your go-tos?
Yeah, I think I was just kind of talking to somebody because they were like, "Well, how am I going to eat all this stuff this over the holidays?" And I really want it. And I'm like, "Okay, well, let's make a plan, right? Like, you can eat it, but here's the parameters and the boundaries that you're going to start setting with yourself to eat it." So I think when it comes to mindfulness, I think you have to be very aware of to be mindful, you have to be present. And if you're going to eat the food, the expectation now is to be present with the food. Because
Mm,
if you're going to eat that cupcake, like I don't want you to miss it. Like you should be
yeah,
totally with the cupcake.
for sure.
It's worth every bite.
Hmm.
So be with every bite. So I think we go back to the mindfulness of dropping into your body and understanding smell, right? What does it feel like to chew? What's the sensations in your mouth? What's the taste? How does it feel when it's going down? What does your stomach feel like? If you can be really present with the food, then you're going to be really more mindful about the boundaries, the parameters you set around food, and the experience of eating it.
This is great. This is so my not so therapist-y way of teaching people how to do this is telling them to look at what's in front of them, like if they're at a holiday party, and ask themselves what genuinely looks good, smells good, something that if I leave here, I'm going to be disappointed that I didn't try it or, have an experience with it. And so I just simply call this be a food snob. Don't just, get a little more mindful as to is that, grocery store cupcake, is that something that's like, oh, you just die for, crave for, want? Or are you just eating it because there's a sense of FOMO and you have to eat it because it's sugar and sweetness? So maybe not the same, but sort of the same concept with really being aware of what's in front of you. And is it really something that you want to partake in?
I love that assessing. And yeah, I mean, do you really want the store-bought cupcake or do you want to wait and, have
Mm,
your grandma's famous fudge? Like, I don't know. But
yeah.
I love that where you're actually challenging yourself to stop, think, and not just react.
Yes, exactly. Now, when it comes to shifting gears a little bit, like long-term solutions or strategies, do you focus on short-term like coping mechanisms to sort of get people going or long-term solutions like here's our long-term strategy?
Yeah, the way I do it is I focus on the emotions first. So, with that, what I work really hard to do is try to shift how we view our emotions. So, most of the time, we view them as an enemy and we want to react quickly when we feel them and we want to get away from them as fast as possible, right? And that's why we
Mhm.
use food. And what I teach my clients to do is we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to actually go opposite and we're going to be friends with our emotion. Because
Mm,
if you start to build trust with the emotional experience and you recognize that it's not going to hurt you, that you're safe when you feel it, that nothing bad is happening in the moment, you're okay, then we start to recognize that we don't need a reaction to the emotion. And so then we don't have to run to the cupboard in a reactive way to get rid of it. So, long term, I work very hard teaching and helping clients practice a way to be friends with their emotions and not run from them anymore. And then, yes, I think long term, there's a lot of trying to understand the food mood relationship. what we're feeling, what we're eating, that type of stuff. But I think number one is just really rewiring our brains on how we're going to deal with and how we're going to respond with emotion.
I love that. Let's get a little more tactical, if you don't mind, in terms of addressing these underlying emotions. So, are there specific techniques, practices as far as tools or strategies that you can maybe just give the listeners to start to get in tune with this process that you help clients navigate essentially their emotional landscape?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think we can start with viewing your emotion and remembering that your emotion is there it's your alert system, right? And it's there to keep you safe. It's there because you've experienced something that was scary, that was dangerous, that you needed to be alert about. And it's coming up now because you're concerned about something or you're thinking about something or you're stressed about something. But remember, it's there to alert you. They're confused. Emotions get confused when they should show up and how big they should be. And so I think what we need to remember is that they're there to help us, and that's why I say, like, let's be friends with our emotions. So when it's there, I tell my clients, and there's a whole strategy around it, but just kind of the summary, I tell my clients, like, let's talk to it. Instead of running from it, let's talk to it. Maybe you need to name it, like, hey, you're here, right? Because what we want to do is we want to talk to it and see it as a friend versus running, it's chasing us and it's an enemy. And so
Mm.
I think talking to it and saying, like, oh, there's the guilt.
Mhm.
Oh, I've felt you before. Oh, I have felt you before and I was safe. You're here again. I've done this before and I was okay. I
Mhm.
can do this again and I'll be all right. And what I tell people and what we go through is we teach with different steps how to do this specifically. And then I say, like, don't expect it to go away, right? Because the emotion and you don't have any trust built yet. But what you can do is after you acknowledge it and after you talk to it, you can then invite it with you. So it's not a panic like, oh my God, here it comes, it's following me. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm in control and you can come with me. I have to go get the mail. You're
Mm.
going to be here. I know I'm safe when you're here because I've felt this many times and I've been okay. And you're going to come with me to get the mail. I know you're not going anywhere. You can hang out, but I'm going to go do this thing. Right. And so what we do is we start taking control.
Okay. Now, does any of this involve work on the client's behalf, where you give them maybe some exercises that they need to practice or implement as a way to build trust with themselves and maybe have some self-compassion or understanding their emotions better, like journaling techniques or, some other strategies that people can start to dive into?
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to awareness. So to start, I would say, like, just journal your emotions.
Mm,
And when people hear journaling, they think like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for that, right? Like it's
hmm.
one more thing.
Hear it all the
And I
time.
say, like, yeah, put a recording on your phone or text it to yourself or do bullet points. Journaling is can be bullet points too, right? It doesn't have to be paragraphs and pages. Like just, and what I tell my clients to do is, like, carry around a package of sticky notes and just, you do your to-do list on those things. So now start doing your emotions. And I think it's really helpful to start to understand what you're feeling, when you're feeling it, and how much you're feeling, because I think we miss a lot of it and then we're
Mhm.
packing it. And then we get home at 5 o'clock and it's like the tsunami and it comes over us. And then we're like, oh my gosh, just give me chips. Like, I don't even care. It was a hard day. Like, I just earned this. I deserve it. I'm going to eat these things. But if you were recognizing throughout the day what was actually happening and you were experiencing, and you could step by step tune in, talk to it, move forward, redirect it, then at 5 o'clock, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I mean, I dealt with all this. It's not going to be the tsunami
Mhm.
because you've been dealing with it throughout the day. And when I do the exercise, it's not like this half-hour thing where you're like talking to your emotion and, like, sitting with it and, that sort of thing. It's like, I mean, I tell my clients like 30 seconds tops. Like
Mm,
there's
mhm.
5 steps, and you're going to go through 5 steps and you're going to do it in 30 seconds. And then you're walking to the mailbox and your emotion's coming with you, but your relationship with that emotion is different and you're building trust with that emotion. So it's really quick and it's not something that, takes a ton of time. Once you keep practicing, you get better and better and better. And then what happens is you feel the emotion, you don't have the reaction. And so then you don't have the behavior.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great first step in cluing yourself in and having more awareness for sure. Now, something that we experience often with our clients is trigger foods, right? They have certain foods and they're like, I can't have this in the house. If it's there, it sends me on a tailspin and I can't stop, right? So we've tried, I have a couple different strategies that I try, and I would love some resources for you and be able to kind of guide clients and obviously listeners in this way. Is sometimes I will tell clients, okay, if you know that these foods trigger you, we need to get them out of the house first and foremost. And then as a practice, once we establish some other healthy habits and understanding, hunger cues and things like that, something that I encourage them to do is understand that you can, if you choose to enjoy, since we've been talking about cupcakes, if you love cupcakes, because I don't know if you experience this with your clients, but the weekends tend to be a disaster. They'll diet Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday, and then the weekends it's more like we call it in my studio, they eat like an asshole. Like they just all of a sudden they lose all inhibition and they're eating things they would have never eaten Monday through Thursday, but Friday comes and they get this hall pass, right? So, something that I try to encourage them to do with foods that they feel are forbidden or off limits is I want you to just try to eat a cupcake on a Monday and see how that feels. And one thing that worked really well for some of my clients was ice cream was a trigger food. They start it, they can't stop it, and I challenge them to buy the ice cream, have it a little bit every single night, see how that feels. And then when the weekend comes, ice cream doesn't hold such you know, a position in your life that it's like, oh my gosh, it's Friday. I can eat ice cream now. Like you've had it Monday through Thursday. There's no FOMO associated with it. You were fine. And now you don't need to eat an entire gallon of ice cream over the course of the weekend. And I would love some tools or resources if you find that this is something that people struggle with.
They struggle with it. And I think we are doing similar things. I mean, I think you don't, that's why I say like the off limit foods, that's a scary way to look at foods. Obviously, if you're training for something specific,
Yeah,
there's probably some
definitely.
foods specifically that you can't, but just with my clients in general, like in general life, having off limit foods, bad foods, right? The diet industry taught us to view foods in that way. And when we can't have something, we want it more, right?
Mhm.
That's just the psychology of everything. You're told no as a kid, you're gonna do it. You're told no as an adult. Well, now you're gonna really do it because you're an adult and you get to make that decision and you're in control. So when we say like no ice cream, um, we're going to want ice cream. And the second we have that bite of ice cream, we're going to be like, well, I failed. So I might as well I'll start over on Monday, right? And like you're saying, like hall pass, Monday is a restart, reset. But yeah, I agree with you. Like eat the have a bite throughout the week. Don't save it all for special occasions. We get into trouble with special occasions because
Mhm.
it's like, oh, this is my birthday, only comes once a year. I only get cake once a year. So I'm going to just eat half the cake. And it's like, yeah, but what would happen if you were offered cake every single day? You wouldn't want it because you
Exactly.
can have it anytime you want. It would lose the allure, right? You wouldn't romanticize that piece of cake as much because it's like, I can have that whenever. So yeah, I think a lot of it is like moderation throughout the week, not holding certain foods for just the weekend. And we start to kind of normalize these different foods and then we start to build a different relationship in the fact that we can have them anytime and then we
Mhm.
don't want them as much.
Yeah, it's interesting how the concept of you want what you can't have is so true when it comes to dieting. I think it's even more true than most other instances, right? It's rampant in the diet culture, and I'm embarking on starting a new 12-week program in January with a whole host of new women coming in. And so my focus is, they're all kind of rolling in and registering right now because we're doing pre-enrollment, and I'm already seeing the concerns with like, okay, am I going to get a meal plan? Am I going to? And yes, those tools and resources are there. And also over the course of 12 weeks, we're embedding lots of these types of tools because this is, again, the problem to the symptom that you're presenting to even sign up for a program. So it's remarkable. Are there any resources that you have found helpful in terms of maybe social media? I know you have some great posts and things like that, or websites, any kind of maybe apps that you have your clients use for struggles in this capacity, anything that you have top of mind? Obviously, you have a great
Um,
program too, which I feel like we should definitely highlight as well.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, the one app I do tell my clients to use is the app that I use. It's a Practice Better app, and I can see what they're using. And I'm in there, writing notes to them, and they're tracking their whys and their food mood journal and those things so they can do that. I tell my clients because again, my goals are different than some other coaches and probably your program is I don't want you to track on, my Fitness Pal and all that stuff. Like get rid of those things. Um, and I say start reading Brené Brown books, right? Daring
Love
Greatly,
her. Yeah.
Rising Strong, and start learning how to be vulnerable with yourself because it's going to help you when you feel emotion.
Yeah.
So I just tell them to like put everything away because there's a lot of information out there. And I know that when I'm searching for something, I'll get like 20 things, right? That I'll say like different stuff. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I'm more like, well, you can go on YouTube and you can, Google emotional eating and all these things, and you're going to get probably several different tips on what to do. But do you really need those tips, or do you need to actually start just understanding your emotional world so you can get control? And my thought is you just need to understand your emotional world. So start reading a book, start
Hmm.
listening to Brené Brown on a podcast or something. Start listen, another great book is The Body Keeps the Score. It's an
Mm.
awesome book talking about trauma and what we hold inside of us and why we have emotions and these responses that come out. And when you start to understand that stuff, you start to understand why you're going to the cupboard.
Yeah, I love that. You're absolutely correct. And I think we touched on self-care a little bit earlier in the podcast, but I think there is a lot of obviously social media things. I'm like, go, take a bath and take a nap and like all this stuff. That's great. That stuff is great. I do that stuff. It's a great way to, self-soothe and all those things. But a lot of times we have the issues of the time uh,
Yeah.
issue. But I think reading is a huge form of self-care, not just self-improvement, but self-care, because what you digest and take away from things like, things like this podcast, like you said, Brene Brown, give you the tools to understand how to self-soothe and why you do what you do. And that to me is the biggest form of self-care, is understanding who you are and why it is you do what you do.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And, we're all busy, right? And reading can be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to buy this book and I'll never read it. But books on tape, like that counts too. I mean, next time you're going on a walk or working out or, cooking dinner, like I'll just have something like that playing. And it's really helpful versus how, Googling like 12 steps to end emotional eating. Cause it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I know it's a 12 step, we can do that, but you got to really dive into your own stuff
Hmm.
and not be in kind of the external, but be in the internal world. And I think books like that can help you get there. And then you're going to start seeing changes.
Most definitely. We'll link up everything in the show notes too, so people know how to find Brene Brown and all of her amazing resources as well. Now, when it comes to the group program that you offer and the one-on-one coaching, can you give us a little bit of how the landscape of that works for someone who may be struggling in these areas?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the one-on-one is one-on-one and you have direct access to me. I let my clients text me. We are constantly in conversation and I'm in the app with you looking at, what food choices you're having, what your mood is, what your emotions are. And then there's also, it's 12 weeks. So I'm in there for 12 weeks. You're getting modules, you have workbooks, we have coaching calls one-on-one. And so we're really able to get down into the emotions, especially if you have a lot of them and you carry, those traumas and things you want to unpack. The group is awesome if you're kind of tuned into your emotions and you don't feel like you have a ton of traumas or things, because in a group it's hard to share those things. We don't want to be vulnerable with strangers, so
Most
it's just a
definitely.
little different, but you're still getting direct access with me. I'm still in there, commenting, writing on with the app, and still a 12-week program and modules and workbooks. So tons and tons of support guiding you. And like I said, the first module is emotions,
Hmm.
because it's just the foundation for the rest of the entire
The
program.
root. It is the root. How long is your program? How many weeks?
Yeah, so it's 12 weeks to 90 days.
Mm.
And yeah, it's just awesome. And most of my clients, they're like, they keep going back to module one, which is the emotions. Like they're like, yeah, I'm getting taught all this stuff, but we keep going there. And I'm like, yeah, because we're experiencing an emotion like every 10 minutes,
Hmm.
right? So when we're experiencing an emotion all the time, you're going to want to go back and practice what to do with your emotions. So
Most
um
definitely. I think
yeah,
that's a
it's all over
continued
the,
practice,
it's a
right?
continued practice.
Most
Yeah.
definitely. Now, do you
Yep.
have an evergreen type of group coaching program where people can join at any time, or does it have start dates and end dates?
Yeah, that's great. I did do the start date, but several people were, wanting to get in and things. And I
Hmm.
thought, you know what, there's emotions all the time. There's always holidays, there's always stuff. So I actually opened it up so it's more evergreen, so you can join at any time. And I've actually found it really helpful with clients to support one another
Hmm.
throughout whatever module they're on. I think there's more bonding, people feel like they can support, people feel like they can kind of share more. And so I've really enjoyed it and I enjoy the clients in there. And so yeah, you can join the group anytime. Which is really, really cool. So I'm constantly getting new people that are excited to change
Yeah, I
in
think
there.
that's so important when you are tackling something that feels overwhelming and you don't know where to start, that you have a community of people that are like, me too, right? Because it can feel so lonely and overwhelming, like I said, and you just think like you're the only one that struggles with this. Well, nobody's going to understand. When you find a community or a group of people who are struggling with the same thing and you are all collectively trying to work to get better, there is so much power in that. So much power in that.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's really cool when, and I've witnessed it. You probably have too, like during coaching calls. I mean, it's just so cool when clients
Mhm.
can connect and they don't feel alone.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this was amazing, and the work you're doing is phenomenal. I'm excited to share this with my audience. Where can people find you? Should they want to work with you? Where can they find you? Website, socials, all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, thanks. Most of my stuff's on my website. So Meredith Ries, and it's Ries, coaching.com. And then I'm on Instagram at Meredith Ries Coaching. And then I just started YouTube. So I mean, I'm learning. I don't know what I'm doing on there because there's a lot to learn, but I am on there and I'm trying to post some tips, tricks, things to just help and give more support out there.
Mhm.
So I am on there with at Meredith Reese. So you can
Okay.
find me there too.
Awesome. Well, we will link everything up in the show notes so people can reach out to you with questions and check out all that you have to offer. But thank you so much for being on the podcast. Again, this work is so needed in the world for women, people in general, but most definitely the demographic I work with is women in diet culture and really creating new ways of relating to your food and your body. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much.